Mass News is your school authority, and despite the COVID-19 pandemic, teacher retention rates across our area were not significantly impacted.
I took a look at the numbers and spoke with school officials on how they've retained teachers.
The COVID-19 pandemic has impacted many aspects of education, but it hasn't appeared to significantly affect teacher retention rates. The statewide average for 2021 is about 88%, consistent with previous years. We checked in with local districts to see how they fared and found their numbers were comparable to the state. In Springfield, 86.2% of the teachers returned, similar to the previous years, but slightly below the state average. In a statement sent to Western Mass News, Springfield Public School Communication Officer Azel Kavan said in part, quote, "We are fortunate in that teacher vacancies throughout our district tend to be distributed evenly amongst our more than 60 schools. For us, that means a school may be short a teacher or two, but none of our schools are likely experiencing a widespread shortage." She goes on to say, "Thankfully, we have systems in place that provide schools with options of employing long-term substitute teachers who essentially function as classroom teachers. We are currently engaged in several programs that provide pathways for paraprofessionals to become teachers and also for Springfield Public School students to become Springfield Public School teachers." Azel tells Western Mass News it's important to note the state data report of vacancies also includes educators who may have transferred to other schools within the district. In Westfield, the district reported an 88.8% retention rate. We reached out to the superintendent of Westfield Public Schools, who says the pandemic has caused additional turnover.
This year we had 50 new teachers, for example, whereas in previous years we've only had maybe 10, 15, or 20.
But overall, he says the retention rate has been stable, which he credits to having open communication with his staff on decisions and processes. And Chicopee Public Schools teacher retention rate was above the state average.
The retention rate was on par with similar years.
At Chicopee Public Schools, 91.6% of teachers returned.
Based off of everything for the last 18 months that educators, and not just teachers, but all the educators within the building, custodians, paraprofessionals, nursing staff, so on and so forth, administrators, being above 90%, I think is successful.
Francis says the success can also be credited to a culture and climate created by the superintendent and resources made available for faculty and staff to better perform their jobs. And it's a similar story at Northampton Public Schools. The superintendent, John Provost, says their retention rate tracked very closely with the statewide average. Northampton schools reported retaining 87% of teachers, comparable to 2020 and 2019. Provost says they've worked hard to have favorable working environments for staff.
Our class sizes are smaller than the statewide average for class size. We have a lot of support through our inclusion program so that we have high numbers of trained individuals going in and out of classrooms.
But he says it hasn't been easy for his staff.
Dealing with the pandemic itself was highly stressful for teachers as they went with very little notice from the normal modes of operation to standing up online learning, and then having that extend not just for weeks or months, but for most of a year.
School districts across the area have open positions mainly for roles that have previously been difficult to fill, like special education teachers. And at Westfield Public Schools, the superintendent says there have been teacher shortages in other disciplines as well.
I am worried for the future because there are less people going into the field.